The wind howled across the frozen ground, rattling the loose metal panels of the small workshop. Ethan Cole tightened the last bolt on the power generator, his breath fogging in the icy air. It was late, too late for visitors, and this part of the colony was quiet after dark. That's why the sudden, sharp knock on the door made him freeze. It wasn't a polite knock. It was urgent, desperate, the sound of someone who had nowhere else to go. He wiped his hands on a rag, listening. Another knock came, faster this time. Ethan walked to the door, his boots crunching on the grit-covered floor. He opened it slowly, prepared to tell some drunk to find shelter elsewhere. Instead, his eyes fell on the smallest, thinnest figure he had ever seen. She stood in the pale glow of the overhead lamp, a tiny alien girl no older than 10, her skin a faded blue that almost blended with the night. A torn blanket hung around her shoulders, and her thin dress was no match for the cold. Her hair, silver white and tangled, fell across her face, and her large dark eyes shimmered with fear. Her lips were trembling, but not just from the cold. "Be my dad. I won't misbehave," she whispered, her voice breaking halfway through the sentence. Ethan blinked, not sure if he had heard her right. The girl swayed slightly, as if her legs could barely hold her up. Behind her, far down the path, he saw faint shapes moving, too far to identify, but enough to make his stomach tighten. Then the low rumble of an engine reached his ears, and a dark vehicle sped away into the fog, leaving only silence and the sound of the wind. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. "You're freezing. Get inside." But she didn't move. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes wide, as if expecting something to leap out of the darkness. "If they find me here, you'll be in danger too," she murmured. Her words made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Whoever she was running from, they weren't just cruel, they were dangerous. Ethan crouched down so he was at her eye level. "Listen, kid, if you stay out here, you'll freeze. I can handle danger. Get inside." For a moment she hesitated. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, her bare feet making almost no sound on the metal floor. When the door shut behind her, the sound seemed to cut her off from the world outside, and her small shoulders sagged in relief. Ethan turned to grab a blanket from the shelf, but stopped when he saw her flinch at the clink of his tools. He moved slower, softer this time, draping the blanket over her and guiding her toward the small heater in the corner. She sat without a word, holding the blanket tightly around her as if afraid someone might take it away. He wanted to ask questions. What was her name? Where was her family? But her eyes told him she wasn't ready. Instead, he went to the small pot on his stove, poured hot broth into a mug, and handed it to her. She stared at it for a second, then sipped. The steam curled up past her face, and for a moment he saw something flicker there. Comfort, maybe even hope. Outside, the wind died for a few seconds. In that silence, another sound reached them. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, and getting closer. Ethan's hand went to the wrench lying on his workbench. The girl's eyes widened again, and she shook her head sharply, as if telling him to hide. He didn't hide. He moved to the door, peeking through the narrow gap in the metal. 3 dark figures were making their way up the path, their shapes tall and broad, their movements too purposeful to be random passers-by. The girl's breathing quickened, and she whispered, "It's them!" The figures stopped just outside the pool of light from the lamp. One of them called out, his voice deep and smooth, almost polite. "We're looking for a runaway. Small, blue skin, about this high. She belongs to her family." Ethan didn't open the door. "Not my problem," he called back, keeping his voice steady. The man stepped forward, just enough for the light to catch his face, sharp features, eyes that didn't smile. If you see her, let us know. She's valuable." The word made Ethan's stomach twist. He waited until their footsteps faded, then shut the bolt on the door. When he turned back, the girl was curled in the corner, her knees drawn to her chest, eyes wet. "They're not my family," she whispered. "My real dad's gone. The woman who took me in, she doesn't want me. She sold me to them." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. He didn't know who she was or what made her so valuable, but he knew one thing. If he let her go back out there, she wouldn't survive the night. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint hum of a vehicle circling back. He moved to the window, saw headlights far off in the fog, sweeping across the frozen ground. They weren't gone. They were searching. He looked back at the girl. She was watching him, eyes filled with fear, but also a flicker of trust. the kind of trust that only came from someone with nothing left to lose. Ethan made a decision in that moment. You're staying here tonight? No one's taking you. Her lips trembled again, but this time it wasn't from the cold. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. The sound of an engine grew louder outside, tires crunching over ice. Ethan reached over and shut off the lamp, plunging the room into shadow. The only light came from the faint orange glow of the heater. They stayed silent, listening to the vehicle slow as it passed the workshop. Then, a sudden thud against the wall made the girl jump. Ethan motioned for her to stay quiet, moving slowly toward the door again. He heard footsteps, close, right outside. A shadow crossed the narrow window slit. Someone was here. Ethan stood frozen, his hand on the door handle, listening to the slow scrape of boots outside. The girl's breathing was fast, shallow, and he could almost hear her heart pounding in the quiet room. The footsteps stopped right by the door, and then came the knock. Slow, deliberate, and far too calm for the freezing night. Ethan didn't open it immediately. He called out, "Who's there?" A smooth voice answered, "We're looking for a child. Small, blue-skinned. She ran away from her home. We only wish to return her to her family." The girl, sitting near the heater, shook her head hard, her eyes wide with panic. She mouthed the word no over and over. Ethan glanced at her, then at the door, and said, "Haven't seen anyone like that. Try somewhere else." There was a pause. Then the same voice said, "If you do see her, you'll be rewarded for telling us. She's very valuable." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not interested," he replied, and waited until the footsteps moved away. He peeked through the slit and saw 3 figures walking down the path. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and their long coats hid whatever weapons they might be carrying. Their movements were slow, as if they were in no rush. They knew the night was theirs to search. When they were gone, Ethan turned to the girl. She was gripping the blanket so tightly her knuckles were pale. He sat down across from her. "You want to tell me what's going on?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the door as if afraid they'd come back. Finally, she whispered, "They're not my family. My father is dead. He died in a mine collapse last year. My stepmother, she didn't want me. She made a deal with those men to sell me." Ethan frowned. "Sell you? Why?" Her voice dropped even lower. "Because I'm worth something. Not to her, but to people like them. They want to take me off-world, to someone who collects people like me." Ethan felt his stomach twist. He didn't know the details, but he had seen enough in the outer colonies to understand what collecting meant. He leaned forward. "You're safe here, at least for tonight." But she shook her head. "No, they won't stop. If they find out you're hiding me, they'll hurt you too." He smirked faintly. "Let them try." She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and hope. For a long time, she didn't speak, sipping the last of the broth he'd given her earlier. When she finally set the cup down, she whispered, "You remind me of him." "Your dad?" Ethan asked. She nodded. "He used to say no one had the right to own someone else. He used to hold my hand like this." She reached out and took his hand for a brief second before pulling away. Ethan stood and moved to the small workbench, pretending to check his tools, but really, he was thinking. The men would come back. If they were offering rewards to strangers, the whole settlement would soon be looking for her. The wrong person could knock on his door any minute. Hours passed slowly. Outside, the wind rose and fell, but every sound felt like footsteps. Around midnight, a faint humming noise filled the air, the distinct sound of surveillance drones. Ethan looked out the back window and saw the flicker of red scanning lights sweeping across the snow. He pulled the girl away from the heater and led her into his workshop. "Get in there," he whispered, pointing to the hollow space inside a dismantled engine core. She hesitated, then climbed in, curling into a ball. He closed the panel but left a gap so she could breathe. Seconds later, someone banged on the front door again. This time, Ethan opened it a crack. A different man stood there, wearing the badge of a settlement enforcer. He glanced inside with sharp, assessing eyes. "We're looking for someone," the enforcer said. "Female, about this tall. Seen her?" Ethan leaned on the doorframe. "Can't say I have. What's she done?" The man's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Belongs to her family. That's all you need to know." His gaze lingered on Ethan for a moment before he stepped back. "If you see her, tell us. You'll be well paid." When the enforcer left, Ethan waited, listening to the crunch of his boots fading away. Then he went back to the engine and opened the panel. The girl crawled out, her eyes wide. "You didn't tell them," she said quietly. "Wasn't planning to," he replied. Her voice shook as she whispered, "You're going to get in trouble because of me." Ethan shrugged. "I've been in trouble before." Later that night, she woke him with a soft cry. He found her sitting by the heater, knees pulled to her chest. "I dreamed they found me," she said. "And you weren't here." He crouched beside her. "I'm not going anywhere." Something changed in her expression then. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a flicker of trust. She leaned her head against his arm for just a moment before pulling the blanket tighter around herself. By morning, word had spread. Shopkeepers glanced at Ethan strangely when he went out to get supplies. Conversations stopped when he walked past. The drones were still in the sky, scanning every corner. He knew it was only a matter of time before they came back in force. When he returned home, the girl was sitting near the window, watching the snow fall. She turned to him and said softly, "They'll find me here. We have to go." He didn't like the idea of running, but the truth was clear. Staying in the settlement would only get both of them caught. "All right," he said finally. "Pack whatever you've got." She gave a sad smile. "I don't have anything." Ethan glanced around his workshop at the shelves of tools and the half-finished projects. Leaving meant abandoning everything he'd built over the years. But when he looked at her, small, alone, and determined, he knew it wasn't a hard choice. Before nightfall, he had gathered food, water, and a few blankets. They would head for the wastelands, far from the reach of the enforcers. But as he was closing the pack, the comm unit on his wall beeped. He crossed the room and pressed the button. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "We know you have her." The voice from the comm was cold and certain, leaving no room for doubt. Ethan didn't answer. He turned it off and stood still for a few seconds, staring at the silent device. The girl was watching him from the corner, her hands gripping the blanket so tightly her fingers were shaking. She didn't ask what the message was. Her eyes already told him she knew. Outside, the settlement felt different. It wasn't just the snow or the quiet. It was the way people looked at him. The moment he stepped out to get last-minute supplies, conversations stopped. Shopkeepers avoided his eyes, pretending to rearrange goods when he walked past. A man he'd known for years crossed the street without a word. He could almost hear their thoughts. That's the human hiding the girl. At the food store, the owner didn't even pretend to be friendly. "Out of stock," he said before Ethan could open his mouth. The shelves behind him were full, but Ethan didn't argue. He picked up only what he could carry without drawing more attention, knowing it wouldn't last long. When he returned, the girl was sitting near the small window, peeking out through the frost. "They're searching," she said quietly. "Two men came to the neighbor's door. They showed my picture." Ethan glanced out. Down the street, he saw one of the tall enforcers speaking to a woman, holding up a hologram of the girl's face. She couldn't be more than 10 years old, but the way they hunted her felt like they were tracking a dangerous fugitive. That night, a faint buzzing sound filled the air, the sound of drones. Ethan stepped outside just enough to see red scanning lights sweeping over rooftops. He moved quickly, pulling the girl away from the window. Back inside. Lights off. They sat in the dim glow of the heater, not speaking. But even in the quiet, Ethan's mind was racing. The girl wasn't just a runaway. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to find her, which meant there was more to her story. Later, when the hum of the drones faded, she finally spoke. "You should leave me somewhere far away. Then they won't bother you anymore." Ethan shook his head. "Not happening." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand. I'm different. My father told me once, before he died, it's in my blood. I can do things." He frowned. "What kind of things?" She hesitated, eyes flickering with uncertainty, then picked up a small wrench from his workbench. She held it in both hands and closed her eyes. The metal began to vibrate, then stopped suddenly, as if whatever force she'd been calling vanished. She opened her eyes again, looking almost embarrassed. "I can make things stop working. Machines, weapons, sometimes even lights. But it only works if I'm close." Ethan sat back, understanding more than he wanted to. "That's why they want you, not just because of who you are, because of what you can do." She nodded. "If the wrong people get me, they can use me for bad things." Before he could answer, there was a knock at the back door. Not the heavy, slow knock of the enforcers. This one was quick, urgent. Ethan moved quietly to the side, pulling a small tool from his belt that could double as a weapon. He opened the door a crack. A boy from the settlement stood there, maybe 16, breathing hard from running. "They know," he whispered. "They're coming here tonight. You have to go now." Ethan didn't waste time asking how the boy knew. He shut the door, grabbed the pack he'd prepared, and told the girl, "We're leaving." The streets were almost empty as they slipped through the shadows, heading toward the edge of the settlement. The cold cut into them, but neither slowed down. Every sound, the crunch of snow underfoot, the wind through the wires, felt louder than it should have, like the night was listening. Halfway to the outskirts, the girl stopped suddenly. "Someone's coming," she said. Ethan looked around. "I don't see anyone." She shook her head. "I can feel it. They're lying in wait." He trusted her instinct without question and led her down a side path between two abandoned storage sheds. The smell of rust and old oil filled the air. They moved quickly, sticking close to the shadows until they reached the outer fence. But just as they started climbing over, a voice called out from behind them. "Going somewhere?" 3 silhouettes emerged from the darkness, the same tall enforcers from before, now joined by 2 more men in heavy coats. One of them raised a light, and its beam landed directly on the girl. Ethan stepped in front of her. "She's not going anywhere with you." The leader smiled faintly. "You can't protect her, human. Hand her over, and maybe we won't break you in half." Ethan's grip on his tool tightened. "Come and try." The air was tense for a moment, the kind of stillness that comes right before a fight. Then, from somewhere deeper in the settlement, the sound of voices and boots echoed. More people were coming. The enforcers backed away slowly, the leader's eyes locked on Ethan. "We'll find you, and when we do, she's ours." They disappeared into the shadows, but the threat hung in the air like a bad smell. Ethan turned to the girl. "We don't have much time. Tomorrow, we're gone from here. For good." Back at the workshop, she curled up near the heater, silent. Ethan stayed awake, keeping watch through the night. He knew this was no longer about just keeping her safe for one night. This was a hunt, and they were the prey. When the first light of morning touched the snow, he began packing more supplies, water filters, spare clothing, and a few tools he could use as weapons. The girl watched him quietly. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere they won't follow," he said, though he wasn't sure such a place existed. She nodded, her small hands folding into fists. "I'll try not to slow you down, Dad." The word hit him harder than he expected. He didn't correct her. Outside, far beyond the settlement, a dark vehicle was parked just at the edge of the road, its engine idling in the cold. Whoever was inside wasn't leaving. They were waiting. Ethan tightened the straps on the pack and pulled his old winter coat over his shoulders. The girl stood by the door, her blanket now tied around her like a scarf, her thin dress hidden under one of Ethan's spare jackets. The sleeves were too long, hanging past her hands. But she didn't complain. She only looked at him with a quiet determination in her eyes, as if she knew this was the only chance they had. The settlement was still half asleep when they stepped outside. The wind cut at their faces, carrying bits of ice that stung the skin. Ethan led her through the narrow back paths, avoiding the main road where patrols might pass. The snow under their boots crunched loudly in the silence, and every time they heard a distant sound, a door closing, a dog barking, they stopped and waited before moving again. By the time they reached the outer fence, the pale light of morning was spreading across the frozen ground. Ethan found a weak spot in the metal panels and pried it open just enough for them to slip through. On the other side, the wasteland stretched endlessly. White plains broken only by jagged rocks and the rusted remains of old mining stations. The girl's steps were small at first, but she didn't ask to stop. She kept her head down, the wind pulling at her silver-white hair. After an hour, they reached a low ridge, and Ethan guided her into the shelter of an old cargo crate half buried in snow. Inside, they took a short rest. She sat on the frozen ground, rubbing her hands together for warmth. "Is Earth like this?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not all of it. There are warm places, green places, oceans you can't see the end of." Her eyes lit up for a moment. "Did you live near the ocean?" "Once," he said. "When I was a boy, my dad used to take me fishing." She smiled faintly. "What's fishing?" "It's catching food from the water. You wait, you're patient, and sometimes you get lucky. She tilted her head. Sounds like you. He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. He wasn't sure if she meant it as a joke or as something deeper. When they moved on, the wind had grown stronger, pushing against them with icy force. The girl leaned into him to keep from falling over. The sun dipped behind thick clouds, turning the world into a dull, frozen gray. By midday, they spotted the broken shape of an old relay station in the distance. Its walls were crumbling, but it was shelter. Ethan pried open the door, and they stepped inside. The air was stale, but warmer than outside. They sat on the floor, sharing a packet of dried food. The girl ate slowly, as if saving each bite. "Did you always live alone?" she asked. "Mostly," Ethan replied. "It's easier that way." She looked down at her hands. "Not for me. I don't like alone." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted the small heater from his pack and set it between them. The glow lit her face, making her look even younger. Later, as she dozed against the wall, Ethan noticed an old console in the corner of the room. It was dead, but he crouched down to check it. To his surprise, a faint light flickered when he touched the panel. The girl woke and walked over. "I can make it work," she said softly. Before he could ask how, she placed her small hand on the console. The faint light grew stronger, the screen coming to life with static before settling on a steady glow. Ethan stared at her, realizing this was part of what made her so valuable, the ability to connect with and activate ancient systems. She glanced at him nervously. "I shouldn't do that. If someone is listening, they'll know." Ethan nodded. "Then we keep it between us." They stayed in the station until evening. Outside, the sky had grown darker, the first hints of a storm moving in. As they prepared to leave, a faint mechanical hum reached Ethan's ears. He froze. The girl looked at him, sensing the danger. Through the cracked doorway, he saw movement, a small drone gliding low across the snow, scanning the ground. It was moving directly toward them. Ethan grabbed the pack and motioned for her to follow. They slipped out the back, keeping low, and headed for the cover of a jagged rock formation. But the drone's scanning light swept over the snow behind them, catching their trail. They ran. The wind whipped against them, the cold burning in their lungs. The drone's hum grew louder, joined by the distant growl of engines. They reached a narrow canyon, its walls high and sharp. Ethan led her inside, hoping the twisting path would hide them. But halfway through, the sound of engines grew so close it seemed to echo off the stone. At the far end of the canyon, a dark vehicle appeared, blocking the exit. Figures stepped out, their shapes familiar, the same enforcers from the settlement. The girl clutched his arm. "It's them." Ethan's eyes darted around, searching for a way out. Above them, part of the canyon wall was lined with rusted mining equipment from years past. One massive drill hung loose, its supports weakened by time. He pulled a long metal rod from his pack, wedged it into the nearest support beam, and shoved hard. The metal groaned, the drill shifting. One of the enforcers shouted, running forward. Ethan gave one final push, and the beam snapped. The drill crashed down, striking the canyon floor with a deafening roar. Rocks tumbled after it, creating a wall of rubble between them and the enforcers. The girl stared at him in shock. "You saved us." He gave her a quick nod, already pulling her toward the narrow path on the side of the canyon. "We're not safe yet." They climbed over the ridge, the wind howling around them. In the distance, the black outline of another abandoned building came into view. It was larger than the relay station, its walls mostly intact. By the time they reached it, darkness had settled fully, and snow was falling in thick sheets. Inside, the air was frigid, but it was shelter. They spread the blankets and sat close to the small heater. The girl's voice was soft when she spoke. "When my father was alive, he told me there would be people like you, people who wouldn't give me away." Ethan didn't know what to say. He only knew one thing. He wasn't letting anyone take her. Far away, beyond the storm, faint lights moved across the horizon. Whoever was chasing them hadn't stopped. They were just getting closer. The storm outside howled through the cracks in the building's walls, making the metal groan. Ethan sat with his back to the cold wall, his pack close at hand, every muscle tense. The girl was curled under a blanket beside the small heater, her breathing slow but restless, as if even in sleep she couldn't escape her fear. He didn't blame her. The way the lights had moved across the horizon before the storm, it meant their hunters weren't far. At first light, the snow had eased, leaving the world covered in a deep white silence. They packed quickly and moved out, their boots sinking with each step. Ethan kept scanning the empty plains, but something in his gut told him they weren't alone. The girl seemed to sense it too. She stayed close to him, never falling behind. They reached a long stretch of frozen ground with jagged rocks scattered like broken teeth. As they crossed, a faint metallic click echoed in the cold air. Ethan froze. It was a sound he recognized, safety catches being switched off. From behind the rocks, figures emerged, rifles in hand. There were more than before, mercenaries, not enforcers this time. Their armor was mismatched, patched together from different worlds, but their movements were sharp and confident. The leader, a scar-faced man with pale eyes, stepped forward. "Hand her over," he said calmly. "We've been paid to take her alive. You don't have to die here." Ethan stepped in front of the girl, his voice steady. "Not happening." The man gave a slow smile, then raised his hand. Two of his men moved to flank them, while the others stayed ready with their weapons. The girl's hand gripped Ethan's coat, her voice a whisper. "We can't fight them." Ethan's eyes darted to the old mining equipment half buried in the snow nearby, a massive drill platform still attached to a fuel line. It was risky, but it was their only chance. He leaned down and muttered to her, "When I say run, you run. Don't look back." As the mercenaries closed in, Ethan took a step sideways, putting himself between them and the drill. His hand moved quickly, flipping the valve on the fuel line and grabbing a loose piece of metal to wedge it open. The hiss of gas filled the air, and he could smell the sharp bite of it instantly. The scar-faced man frowned. "What are you doing?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a small spark tool from his belt, the kind used to ignite welding torches. The mercenaries realized too late what he intended. With one strike, a bright flame burst to life, leaping toward the gas. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was enough. Fire roared across the drill platform, sending a shockwave through the frozen ground. The mercenaries staggered back, some falling, others shouting in panic as the old structure collapsed. "Run!" Ethan shouted. The girl didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the far side of the rocks, Ethan right behind her. The air was filled with smoke and the sound of groaning metal. One of the mercenaries tried to cut them off, but Ethan swung the heavy metal rod in his hand, striking the man across the chest and sending him sprawling into the snow. They scrambled up a narrow slope, slipping on the ice, until they reached a shallow ridge that overlooked the next valley. Ethan risked a glance back. The mercenaries were already regrouping, two of them chasing while the others tried to put out the flames. They slid down into the valley, their boots kicking up snow. The girl was breathing hard, but she didn't slow. At the far end, they spotted an old outpost, its roof half collapsed, but its walls still standing. They ducked inside, finding themselves in what used to be a control room. The floor was littered with broken screens and rusted tools. Ethan pushed a fallen beam against the door as a makeshift barricade, then leaned against it to catch his breath. The girl looked at him with wide eyes. "You could have died back there." He gave a small shrug. "So could you." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. I can help. I can stop them." Ethan frowned. "How?" She held up her hands, her fingers twitching nervously. "If I touch their weapons, I can make them stop working. Zod, my father told me never to do it unless there was no other choice." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We may not have a choice next time." They didn't have to wait long. The sound of boots crunching in the snow reached them minutes later. Shadows moved outside the cracked window. The girl glanced at him, and he gave a small nod. When the first mercenary forced the door open, she darted forward, her small hands slapping the barrel of his rifle. The weapon sparked once, then went completely dead. The man looked stunned, just long enough for Ethan to knock him down. Another came through the side window, but she was faster. She grabbed his pistol, and the same thing happened, dead in her hands. The mercenaries hesitated now, unsure of what they were dealing with. One of them shouted, "Grab her!" Ethan swung his rod hard, sending the man reeling. The girl ducked behind him, her small hands shaking but ready to reach for the next weapon. After a short, tense struggle, the mercenaries pulled back, dragging their unconscious comrades with them. Ethan closed the door again, his heart still pounding. You did good, he said, looking at her. She swallowed hard. I don't like hurting people. You didn't hurt them, he said. You just stopped them from hurting us. For the first time, she gave a small, shy smile. My father would have liked you. Ethan didn't answer, but inside, something heavy shifted. He'd told himself from the start that this was just about keeping her alive until she could be safe somewhere else. But the way she looked at him now, with trust so complete it was almost painful, made him wonder if he could ever let her go. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the distant growl of engines. The mercenaries might have been driven back for now, but Ethan knew they would return. And next time, they wouldn't come alone. Snowflakes drifted through the broken roof of the outpost, melting instantly against the small heater's glow. Ethan sat on the cold floor, his back to the wall, every sense alert. The girl was curled beside him under a blanket, her head resting lightly on his arm. Outside, the wind hid most sounds, but he could still catch faint noises, the crunch of footsteps far away, the low hum of engines idling in the distance. Their hunters hadn't given up. They were just waiting for the right moment. By midday, the clouds had thinned, letting weak sunlight spill across the frozen valley. Ethan knew they couldn't stay in the outpost much longer. The mercenaries had seen where they ran. If they came back in greater numbers, there would be no escape. They set out again, moving along a narrow ravine that wound between tall cliffs. The ground was uneven, half ice and half loose rock. The girl stayed close, her eyes scanning the cliffs as if expecting danger from above. Ethan didn't say it out loud, but he was thinking the same thing. Halfway through the ravine, his fears came true. A shadow moved high on the ridge, followed by the glint of metal. Down! Ethan barked, pulling the girl behind a boulder just as gunfire erupted. The sharp cracks echoed off the stone walls, snow bursting into the air where bullets struck. Pinned down, Ethan scanned for an escape. The ravine narrowed ahead, and just beyond the choke point was an old structure, one of the abandoned defense stations left from a mining dispute years ago. If they could reach it, maybe they'd find something to hold off the mercenaries. On my signal, Ethan whispered. He counted silently, then broke from cover, running low and fast. The girl followed, her feet slipping on the ice, but never stopping. Bullets snapped past them, ricocheting off the stone, but they reached the station's rusted doorway and shoved it open. Inside, the air was stale, but the walls offered cover. Dust coated every surface, and ancient control panels lined one wall. Ethan pushed the door shut, using an overturned metal crate to block it. Outside, the gunfire slowed, but voices shouted in the distance. They were surrounding the building. The girl moved to one of the panels, her fingers brushing the dust away. I think I can make this work, she said. Ethan glanced at her. What is it? Defense turrets, she replied quietly. If they're still here, I can turn them on. He crossed the room in 2 steps. Do it. She placed her small hand flat on the panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the old screen flickered to life, faint green symbols glowing through the static. The hum of power spread through the building, followed by a deep metallic groan from outside. Through a crack in the wall, Ethan saw them. 2 rusted turrets rising from the snow on either side of the station. They rotated slowly, their targeting sensors blinking to life. The mercenaries must have seen them too, because shouting erupted outside. A burst of gunfire was met with a sudden, deafening roar as one of the turrets fired, its heavy rounds tearing into the ridge above. Snow and rock exploded into the air, sending the mercenaries diving for cover. Ethan grabbed his pack and moved to the side window. We've got a chance. Let's move while they're pinned. But the girl shook her head. No, if we leave now, they'll just follow. We can finish this. He hesitated. She was right. If they didn't drive them back now, they'd never get a moment's peace. All right, let's make it count. She stayed at the console, guiding the turrets by touch. Every time a mercenary tried to push forward, the turrets locked on and forced them back with precise bursts of fire. The snow was torn up, the air filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal from shattered weapons. Then the mercenaries changed tactics. A rocket launcher tube peeked over the ridge, aimed directly at the nearest turret. They're going to take it out, Ethan shouted. The girl's brow furrowed in concentration. She closed her eyes, her hand pressing harder to the console. Outside, the turret jerked suddenly, its sensor locking on to the man with the launcher before he could fire. A single round tore through his position, scattering the others. Minutes felt like hours, but finally the remaining mercenaries broke off, disappearing into the snowstorm building in the distance. The sound of engines faded until there was only the wind again. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering for the first time in what felt like days. "You did it," he said. The girl stepped back from the console, her legs unsteady. "I just wanted them to stop chasing us." He put a hand on her shoulder. "They'll think twice before coming after you again." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with something that was almost relief. "I didn't want you to get hurt. Not because of me." He shook his head. "Kid, I've been hurt plenty of times, but this time it was worth it." The warmth of the moment didn't last long. As Ethan moved to pack up, pain shot through his side. He looked down and saw a dark stain spreading under his coat. A bullet must have grazed him during the dash to the station, and now the wound was bleeding through the makeshift bandage he'd tied earlier. The girl's eyes went wide. "You're hurt!" She knelt beside him, her hands fluttering as if she didn't know what to do. "It's fine," he lied, though the pain was sharp. "We just need to keep moving." But when he tried to stand, his vision swayed. The girl grabbed his arm, her small frame steadying him. "You can't walk far like this," she said. "We have to stop." They stayed in the defense station through the night, the turret still active outside. The girl sat beside him, refusing to sleep, watching over him as the wind howled against the metal walls. Once, he heard her whisper under her breath, "Don't die, Dad. I'll be good. I promise." The words sank into him, warm even through the pain. He wasn't her father, not by blood. But in that moment, he knew he'd fight harder than ever to keep her safe. In the early hours before dawn, the rumble of engines returned. Ethan forced himself to stand, his injury burning, and moved to the window. What he saw made his heart freeze. Not mercenaries this time, but a convoy of military vehicles, their insignia not of the settlement or the hunters. They were Earth Alliance soldiers, and they were heading straight for the station. The rumble of engines grew louder, shaking the thin walls of the defense station. Snow swirled through the air outside, carried by the wind that howled between the cliffs. Ethan gripped the window frame, his breath slow and careful. The girl stood beside him, clutching the edge of his coat as she peered out. The vehicles rolled into view, armored, heavy, painted in the dark colors of the Earth Alliance. The soldiers moved with precision, spreading out in formation. Their helmets reflected the weak morning light, and their rifles were kept low but ready. Ethan didn't know if they were here to help or to take the girl away just like the mercenaries wanted. He stepped back from the window. "Stay behind me," he told her quietly. The first knock on the door was loud and commanding. "This is Captain Rourke of the Earth Alliance. Identify yourself." Ethan hesitated, then unblocked the door and opened it halfway. A tall man in heavy armor stood there, his breath steaming in the cold air. His eyes flicked to Ethan's wound, then to the small figure peeking out from behind him. "We detected an ancient defense system activating in this area," the captain said. "That kind of tech doesn't turn on by itself. We also have reports of multiple armed groups pursuing a miner. Is that her?" Ethan didn't answer right away. The girl's small hand tightened around his. She whispered, "Please, don't let them take me." "She's under my protection," Ethan said finally. The captain studied him for a long moment. "Then you should know she's not just a runaway. She's listed in our records as part of a lost royal bloodline from the Althari, an allied species. She's important, which means she's under our protection now." The girl's eyes widened. "Royal?" she whispered, almost as if the word didn't belong to her. Two soldiers stepped forward, carrying a portable med kit. The captain motioned to Ethan's side. "You're hurt. Let us patch that up." Ethan allowed them to treat the wound, but he didn't let go of the girl's hand. "If I let you take her," he said, "where will she end up? Back with the people trying to sell her." The captain shook his head. "She'll be taken to a secure alliance facility, safe housing, education, a life where no one can exploit her abilities." The girl stared at the ground, silent for a long moment. Then she looked up at the captain. "Will he be there?" she asked, pointing to Ethan. "That's not standard procedure," the captain replied carefully. Her voice shook. "Then I'm not going." The soldiers glanced at one another. The captain's brows drew together. "You don't get to choose that, kid. This is about your safety." She stepped forward, still holding Ethan's hand. "He is my safety. He's my dad." The captain let out a slow breath. "You two realize this complicates everything." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "Then figure it out. She stays with me." There was a long silence as the wind whistled through the cracks in the station walls. Finally, the captain spoke again. "All right. I can arrange temporary guardianship under Alliance supervision. You'll both be transported to an Alliance world. She'll get protection, and you'll be her legal guardian until we determine the best long-term placement." "That works," Ethan said without hesitation. The soldiers moved quickly after that, gathering what little supplies Ethan had. The girl kept close to him, her eyes darting to every movement, as if expecting someone to change their mind at the last second. Outside, the convoy was already turning toward the open plains. The girl climbed into the back of the lead vehicle, Ethan right behind her. The seats were cold, the air filled with the faint hum of the engine. She leaned against him, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're really leaving?" "Yeah," he said. "Somewhere they can't find you." She was quiet for a while, watching the snow blur past the window. Then she said softly, "I don't care where we go, as long as you're there." Hours passed as the convoy pushed through the wastelands. Eventually, they reached a shuttle landing site where a sleek transport ship waited. Its hull gleamed under the pale sun, and the warmth of its interior hit them the moment they stepped inside. The captain met them at the boarding ramp. "From here, it's a straight trip to Fort Halden. You'll have food, shelter, and security. No one will touch her there." Ethan gave a short nod. The girl was holding onto his coat so tightly it was wrinkled. When the ship lifted off, the world outside turned into a blanket of white beneath them. She pressed her forehead to the window, her eyes wide as the horizon curved away. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan watched her for a moment, remembering the night she'd knocked on his door, shivering and alone. She was still the same child, but now she had something she didn't have back then: safety, and someone who wouldn't let go. When they landed hours later, the air was warmer, carrying the scent of green fields and open water. The fortress city of Halden stretched in the distance, its towers shining in the sunlight. Soldiers escorted them to a secure residential district where a small but comfortable home waited. Inside, the girl explored every room, her bare feet padding softly on the smooth floors. She stopped at the window, staring out at the gardens below. Then she turned to him with a smile that was small but real. "It feels safe." Ethan set down their bags. That's the point. A few days later, as they walked together in the gardens, the girl ran ahead, her laughter light in the warm air. She turned back to him, calling out, "Dad!" before racing toward the far end of the path. He smiled, the words settling deep inside him like it belonged there. She was no longer a cold, trembling stranger at his door. She was home. And as long as he was breathing, she always would be.